Welcome to The Blast Zone, the podcast where we dig up the bombs that shook Hollywood and try to find out why they went up in flames. This week, will I understand this movie if I haven't seen Warriors 1 through 12? This is The 13th Warrior. Welcome to The Blast Zone.
Welcome to The Blast Zone.
We are not a podcast about bad movies. We are a podcast about movies that did badly.
That's right.
I am Jon Drake, in-house film critic of my Letterboxd account.
And I'm Ian Dukes. I'm a person with thoughts and feelings, and some of them are about movies.
Movies like The 13th Warrior, which we'll be talking about today. Very exciting.
Yes.
Big one. Big flop of the 90s. We love 90s flops.
We do.
Good times. But before we get into that, Ian, how are you doing this week?
I was going to say that there's a little black spot on the sun today, but then I realized it's the same old thing as last week's episode. So I guess it's my destiny to be the king of redundancy.
Out, damn spot. It's another king talking about spots. Or I guess that was Lady Macbeth that said that line, right?
That was the lady. Whose blood was that she was trying to get out? I don't know. I don't read Shakespeare.
I did want to watch the Coen brothers one with Denzel, though. Or just the Coen brother.
I started it. It's moody and black and white and stylized, but I didn't get through it yet.
I'll find time one of these days. So is that good or bad? What's going on with you? I can't tell.
It's just dumb. I mean, It's always a little rough, but just repeating my King of Pain lyrics from 1983's Synchronicity by the Police.
Are you on a police bender lately? What's going on?
I don't know. I think I'm on a pain bender.
Well, we're recording this a couple days before the Super Bowl. I am just a ball of nerves right now.
Wow.
This is the only Super Bowl in my lifetime I've actually gave a shit about because it's the only one I've seen the Bengals playing. So
yeah, that's a lot to deal with.
A lot riding on this. But I'm sure I'll have fun either way. That's not true. I'm going to have a miserable time if they lose. I'm sure Ian will work in an update after the game, and I'll let you guys know how it went if you're not football fans. When you tune in next week, I'll either be sounding happier than usual, or there will be a gray cloud hanging over the episode. And that's that.
Update. John had a miserable time. Sorry, buddy.
We should have bet each other. You know how mayors of different cities bet each other signature food or something from their city? We should have had a L.A., Cleveland. Would you have?
First of all, the Bengals are from Cincinnati.
Oh, man. I muffed that.
Cincinnati-style chili is fucking gross. Not a fan.
That would be like a punishment if you ship me a case of Skyline chili.
And what is L.A.'s signature food? Like avocado toast? What would we even do here? A smoothie?
Like taco truck tacos.
Oh, like a street taco. A street taco would work.
Korean barbecue.
I do love Korean barbecue. All right, this is completely unbalanced. You have all the good food. So I've never been to Cincinnati, but there is a bar in the Bowery in Manhattan that is a Bengals bar. It's called Phoebe's. I'm not going there this week. I live far from Manhattan now. I used to live very close. Right. So I would go there occasionally to watch the games. And on game days, they would have Skyline chili or Skyline style. I assume they made it in-house, but they served it the same way. You could get it 3 ways, 4 ways over spaghetti, whatever you wanted to do as a dip. And yeah, it's not for me, man.
I had it once in the Cincinnati airport. I was stuck there just as the restaurants were closing down at 9 p.m. and I got one order of something and I was in a weird state and the little Skyline joint was in a weird state. So I have no ability to actually judge what the heck I ate that night. So at some point I shall make it back to the beautiful state of Ohio and taste what they have on offer.
Now, Skyline is not the only Cincinnati style chili though. They're just the most famous. Gold Star is another chain that does it. And then I think individual restaurants will do their own take on it, but it's kind of sweet. It's kind of sweet for chili. It's got like cinnamon and more like autumnal flavors like you would see in like a mulled wine almost.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah, interesting's a good word for it. So before we disparage the great city of Cincinnati anymore, did you have a chance to watch anything this week you wanted to tell the listeners about?
I did. Interestingly enough, in a very busy week, I snuck in a whole season of a little show, a little miniseries, which speaks for how much I liked it. It's called The Woman in the House Across the Street from the Girl in the Window.
Oh, you don't even tell me you were watching this. Usually we're in contact about these things.
It happened real fast, and I just chugged it down. It just came out. It's on Netflix. It stars Kristen Bell. You know, Netflix likes to just drop stuff on you out of nowhere, so I watched it pretty quick before I figured out what it was. And it's hard to tell what it is. You go and know, is this a comedy, a spoof of the romantic mystery genre, or is it actually a serious psychological thriller? And it kind of works as both. For me, at least, that's how well executed it is, that you're kind of into the thriller parts and like, what's really going on here? And is she going nuts? Is there really murders going on? And the thriller part keeps you on the hook. And yet there's just these absurd moments that made me laugh out loud. So I really got a lot out of it.
Nice. I was intrigued by it. I had an inkling from the title that it was mostly a parody and mostly a spoof. But I do really appreciate when spoof shows or movies actually do the work to craft a compelling narrative. Mm-hmm. So it's not just, hey, remember when this thing happened in this movie? Well, we're going to do it, but make it silly. Like they're actually telling a story, and they're more commenting on the tropes and the tendencies of these type of movies and shows rather than just parroting individual scenes. which is kind of what went wrong with the parody movie genre.
Yeah, this has all those scenes and moments, and sometimes then you're waiting for the comedy and you're like, oh no, she's just freaking out right now, and this is a scary moment.
I think especially for a show, you need those moments to carry it. A show is not like a 90-minute movie. You spend a little more time with them, and if it's just nonstop silliness, you have nothing to ground yourself.
I checked reviews after I finished it, and it's not that well liked. So I'm not sure if listeners will find it as fun as I did, but I sure liked it.
I went in a wildly different direction than you did.
Okay.
I once again am bringing 2 films to show and tell because they are somewhat thematically linked. Like I do. Like I brought 2 Westerns one day. Yeah. I have 2 that I think make sense to talk about together.
I liked the little doubleheader action.
I guess what I was feeling this week is like disastrous startup documentaries.
Okay.
For my day job, I work in a startup. Maybe that's part of the reason I'm so attracted to them. But to be honest, I've always been attracted to corporate malfeasance and collapse. I always loved the Enron book, The Smartest Guys in the Room, or Too Big to Fail, all that type of stuff. The Big Short, I find it very captivating. So I checked out the We Work documentary from Hulu about Adam Newman, who is just a maniac of a person, being played by Jared Leto, unsurprisingly enough, in an adaptation that's forthcoming.
A maniac of an actor. That's perfect.
Birds of a feather. And then I also checked out The Inventor, which is about Theranos and Elizabeth Holmes, and followed that up immediately with a 11-part podcast called The Dropout by ABC News about the same thing. And then I bought books about both of them, which I'll dive into when I finish what I'm currently reading. I don't know what it is. And then there's a mini series about Elizabeth Holmes with Amanda Seyfried coming out shortly.
Wow.
I believe first week of March it's premiering on Hulu, and she's doing the Elizabeth Holmes voice, which is very exciting.
Ooh.
I don't know. I'm just so fascinated by the hubris of billionaires to lie so straight-faced for so long and assume that nothing will come of it. I'm sure there are plenty of startups that did that and did get away with it, the fake it till you make it thing, because they both could have probably turned a profit eventually if they were just allowed to lie to their investors and tread water for a few more years. I find it fascinating, and I highly recommend both those documentaries if you're into that sort of thing.
I find it interesting, but I have a limited stomach for it. I'm curious about the awfulness of these people and how they ruin lives. We'll see. I might dabble based on your recommendation.
The documentaries are a little shorter than a podcast series, so that might be easier to stomach. And, I think they diverge in an interesting way because I believe the WeWork debacle was fueled entirely by greed. There was no altruism to it. He just wanted to get rich by any means necessary, made a lot of promises he knew he couldn't fulfill. I find Elizabeth Holmes way more interesting than Adam Newman because I can't for the life of me figure out if she was just a grifter or if she really thought this was going to work eventually and help people eventually, and that's what she really wanted to do. Obviously, she wanted to get rich in the process.
She never dropped that. Like, she never fessed up.
To this day, as far as I know, yeah. Like, she called it a business failure and not fraud, but she was obviously found guilty of fraud eventually. But I really can't parse out where the lie stops and her reality begins, and I'm not sure she can either, which is why I find that story more interesting. The Adam Newman one is just more, look at how crazy this person is. So with that being said, let's talk about some other megalomaniacs like Michael Crichton.
Yeah.
The 13th Warrior.
Losing huge sums of money. That's something this movie did too, as a little startup enterprise.
That became like a second career for John McTiernan, was just losing money for movie studios at some point. Poor guy. He made great movies once upon a time. Is this one of them? We'll find out. What did you know about the 13th Warrior before the podcast came out? Do you remember when it came out? Do you remember the book at all?
I don't remember the book. I was trying to remember what I knew about the movie. I think that my first web design studio may have worked on the site for this movie because the timing is about right and the visuals were familiar, but I don't think I worked on it personally. Someone else in the office was doing it. So I could picture some 13th
Not like
Warrior
Jason
stuff.
X, what you personally oversaw, right?
Jason X, I actually wrote and directed, and then I submitted it to the studio.
You scoundrel. Kept so much back from us during the episode.
Yeah, no, this one, I don't have a good memory for things, especially this is a long time ago. So pretty positive that I never watched it because it just is not familiar. And it feels like it came and went pretty quick. We'll get to how it did at the box office. But like, this isn't a movie that stuck around and was in your face, at least not in my world.
I have a similar experience, except for the working on the website part, because I think I was like 11. But I remember this movie vaguely. I remember maybe a trailer, definitely posters, definitely coming across it at the rental store. If I ever watched it, it was just half paying attention to it while it was on HBO or something in the background. I certainly didn't know what it was about when I sat down to watch it. I had no concept that it was about Vikings. Because with Antonio Banderas in the lead role, it's not kind of where your mind goes first off. So when I got into the movie and I was like, oh, this is different than what I imagined. I guess that's a good thing, right? If a movie surprises you.
Yeah, I like that about it. There's a lot of unique things about this movie, and that's some of the most attractive stuff is the premise has just a really fun bunch of stuff they smashed together.
It's a very unique movie in a lot of ways. It's a type of movie that I have a hard time drawing a comparison to. And when I do come up with a comparison, it's not a movie at all, which I'll say for a little bit later. But do you want me to get into the production of this movie? Because it was not smooth.
Yeah, let's hear how this thing happened.
In 1976, Michael Crichton published his 14th novel titled Eaters of the Dead. He wrote the book, which is a combination of Beowulf and the personal account of how 10th century Arab Muslim traveler Ahmed ibn Fahlan ibn al-Abbas ibn Rashad travels with a group of Varangians after a friend of his gave a lecture titled The Boars of Literature, which argued that Beowulf was an uninteresting story at its core.
Beowulf is too long and boring. In this 3-hour lecture, I will...
Crichton set out to write a tale that would make the classic epic poem appealing to younger audiences. A divergence from Crichton's typical hard sci-fi novels, Eaters was relatively well received. In the mid to late 90s, Crichton books were a hot commodity for adaptation, following the huge success of Jurassic Park and its sequel The Lost World, not to mention other commercial hits based on his work like ER, Disclosure, and Twister.
I gotta be honest with you, Twister didn't blow me away.
Eaters of the Dead was picked as the next novel to get the big budget treatment, and John McTiernan quickly signed on to direct. William Wisher Jr. and Warren Lewis penned a screenplay, Antonio Banderas was cast as the lead, and production began in June 1997 with a reported budget of $85 million. Filmed in various locations throughout British Columbia, production was relatively smooth until test audiences began attending screenings during post-production. The response to the movie was overwhelmingly negative, and McTiernan was fired from the production, with none other than Crichton himself being brought on to direct extensive reshoots, recut what had already been shot, and oversee the entire post-production process. Crichton would fire the composer Graham Revell and hire his frequent collaborator Jerry Goldsmith to score the film, which Crichton had also renamed The 13th Warrior.
He thought it sounded lucky.
By the time the reshoots and marketing expenses were added, the film's budget had soared to nearly $160 million, making it one of the most expensive productions of all time up to that point. A release date of August 27, 1999 was set, and the movie had a tall mountain to climb to become profitable. Sadly, audiences still weren't enthusiastic about this version, as it opened in second place with just over $10 million. Critics were also not sold on it, as it received mostly negative reviews and currently sits at 33% on Rotten Tomatoes. It would limp out of theaters with a worldwide take of only $61.7 million, meaning it would have been a box office bomb even at its original $85 million budget. As it sits now, though, it is a member of the esteemed $100 million Losers Club, losing an estimated $130 million and becoming a Hollywood cautionary tale. There it is, $100 million.
Here we go. Ring the bell. Do we have a 100 million loser club bell?
Let's get a bell.
We do now.
Yeah, we should.
Ding.
You lose.
This is only the third $100 million loser we've covered.
It's a lot. It's not that easy to lose that much.
No, typically you have to have a budget over $100 million. Not that many movies get that.
Yeah, you got to have a huge budget, and then you got to fail really badly, because a lot of those ones, just because of their inertia, they get close to breaking even if they're not that good.
Yeah, a lot of them are. I do want to mention that some of the producers dispute that figure, but that's pretty widely reported. Everywhere I looked, it was between $110 and $130 million was the reported losses. So we're going to roll with that.
Okay.
But obviously, you can't open up the books and dig in. So that's the 13th Warrior story. McTiernan, good action director, but man, he could not catch a break towards the end of his career, which if you go back and listen to our last Action Hero podcast, ended with him actually going to jail.
How far away was he here from that incident? I forgot what the timeline was.
That was about Rollerball, was when that all came up, which was 2002, but he wasn't charged until 2006.
Okay.
So 99 is when this movie came out. He probably finished working on this movie sometime in early 98, but he still made movies after this. They were smaller budgeted and none of them were successful. He had Rollerball in 2002. Actually, that had a $70 million budget. Holy shit. Rollerball cost $70 million. Why would you spend $70 million on a movie with fucking Chris Klein in the lead? That is insane to me. I'm throwing it on the schedule right now. Wow, I was expecting to see $30 million in there. This movie looks like hot dog shit for $70 million. Give me a fucking break.
Oh.
All right, now that I'm all worked up. And then Basic was his last movie, another $50 million budget, only made 42. But that had a good cast. That had Travolta, Samuel L. Jackson, Connie Nielsen, Giovanni Ribisi, Taye Diggs. I remember being intrigued by that movie when I saw the trailers. It's some kind of military mystery cover-up thing.
We should probably just revisit for people who haven't. I mean, you should definitely go back and listen to our Last Action Hero episode for the full story. But he worked with a famous private investigator and was wiretapping his colleagues to try to find out how they were working against him. And he ended up getting convicted, not for the actual act.
Perjury, essentially.
But for lying to the FBI about it in a very complex set of moves where he lied, they caught him, he put in a guilty plea, he withdrew the guilty plea and they recharged him. And then
he got more time, I think.
Oh, yeah.
When his original plea deal was better and he was able to vacate it, and then he got a worse deal. Poor guy. He's been out for a while now, hasn't worked. There's been rumors about him working. Finished out his sentence under house arrest on April 3rd, 2014. It's a super interesting story. I think we theorized Last Action Hero was a while ago. That was only our 9th episode. But I think we theorized that there has got to be a movie about this coming at some point, right?
So juicy.
This whole story is so insane. They probably want to wait for some of the people involved to, die because they're all kind of old.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was Anthony Pellicano, who's famous enough to have his own Wikipedia page, was the private investigator that McTiernan was working with.
Yeah, that was a name that would come up in the 90s, I guess. He was associated with Michael Jackson stuff. He was just like the Hollywood PI that would get his nose in all the dirty dealing.
Oh, he did a bunch of time, too. He served a term of 30 months in a federal prison for illegal possession of explosives, firearms, and homemade grenades.
What the fuck?
What the fuck is a homemade grenade? Is that like a pressure cooker bomb or something?
That's scary.
That's very scary. And then in 2008, he began serving an additional sentence for subsequent convictions for other crimes, including racketeering and wiretapping.
Okay.
He's a interesting story here. All right, so we went on a tangent. So McTiernan was still making movies at this point. He was not in jail yet, hadn't even committed a crime yet, as far as we know. But audiences hated this movie enough where they took him right off of it. And at a great expense to the studio, they brought Michael Crichton in, who had a little bit of film experience. But, when you hear the name Michael Crichton, it's not where your mind goes. You think of a writer.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's the steady hand you need to come over and fix this troubled production.
Yeah, the whole thing smacks of some kind of political power play because first off, McTiernan is, like experienced director. What kind of product could he deliver that would be so wacky? Audiences were so horrified by it or angered by it that they're like, you're gone. We're going to just try something crazy to try to save this movie and construct something else out of it.
I know all the action stuff was McTiernan's, and that stuff's pretty well done. He has a pretty signature style when it comes to filming action sequences, and he's famous for it. If you look through his catalog, they're mostly action movies, the successful ones anyway. So I don't know what Crichton came in. You could say maybe he came in to inject some humor. That's what the reshoots were. There's not a ton of humor in the movie. There's a few scenes of jovial banter between Banderas and the Viking crew.
I read one guy speculating that the whole climactic final battle, which is like the second final battle of the movie, was pasted on by Crichton afterwards, that it was supposed to end earlier. But I don't know how to corroborate that or bring any evidence to speak to that.
If that's true, it does kind of back up the fact that the budget was inflated so much by the reshoots, because the first thing I said when I saw that sequence is, this must have been fucking expensive. The set they're shooting in, the enormity of it, and just the way it's all framed. It seems like they're filming it on a pretty substantial soundstage. Must have been a huge expense.
Yeah, all the big set piece sequences are lavish. They've had to redo a whole sequence that could really balloon the budget.
The human bone budget alone must have been millions at this point. It would have been easier to just dig up some bodies. We're kind of alluding to parts of the story. Should we start walking through it at this point?
Let's jump in.
All right.
So it is the year 922. Poet Ahmed Ibn Fadlan, played by Antonio Banderas, is exiled from the court of the Caliph of Baghdad for flirting with a married woman. On his way to his new job as ambassador to a distant northern land, Ahmed is chased by some bandits and takes refuge with a camp of Vikings. With the help of a multilingual Norseman named Herger, played by Dennis Storhøi, Ahmed learns that the Vikings are celebrating the funeral of their king, and he meets the stoic Bolvi, heir to the throne. The next morning, a young prince arrives and begs for help to defend his father Hrothgar's kingdom from an ancient evil, a terror that must not be named. An old woman oracle tells Bolvi that 12 Vikings plus one outsider must go to fight the evil, and Ahmed is recruited to be the 13th warrior.
Right away, first sign of the movie, if you have any inkling of the drama in the background, you see a McTiernan/Crichton production. And I couldn't help but wonder, was that always the plan to open with that? Or did they tack that on after Crichton came in and finished it? Because McTiernan's solely credited as the director. Doesn't it almost feel like they're throwing Crichton a bone there?
Yeah. I mean, if I was him and I was going to take it over, I would say, okay, well, now my name goes on the first title card.
Even before directed by Jon McTiernan, I'm pretty sure I'm remembering that correctly. The first thing you see.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Is a Crichton-McTiernan production. And Crichton comes first.
Well, he brought it home, for better or worse.
I noticed that you said flirting with a married woman. I got the idea we didn't see all the story there. I think he might have done more than flirt.
Yeah, he might have. It goes real fast, which I guess, I always give credit to movies that move quickly with exposition. And so it's just a voiceover and a few little images that show him passing a beautiful woman in a hallway and looking into her eyes. So yeah, what did he do with her? I don't know, but he made her husband mad and he got himself kicked out of court.
In 3 minutes, the voiceover handles a lot of that exposition for us. If this was Denis Villeneuve directing the story, the first movie would just be their affair and him getting kicked out of the court. And then he'd be like, all right, I got to go hang out with some Vikings now. And that would be the second movie.
Yeah, he's already way up the road. A couple minutes in, turns into a Hope and Crosby Road movie.
Pretty much.
Only it's Omar Sharif and Antonio Banderas.
Omar Sharif came out of retirement for this movie for what's essentially a cameo. He's not in the movie very long.
It's a cute little charming role. The friend who helps the hero get acclimated to talking with the Vikings.
I don't know why I said he came out of retirement. That was not true.
Oh, okay. I was going to say he went right back into retirement. I think maybe that's the story, because I read that he, after this, thought it was so terrible that he's like, that was a huge mistake. I'm never going to act in one of these cheap ass movies again. I'm only doing stuff that's important.
Yeah, he worked steadily up until his death in 2015. Nothing quite as well. He was in Hidalgo, so he's full of shit. I'll never do a bad American production again. No, you did. Hidalgo sucks. I love Vigo, but the movie's not good.
He might have needed the money, but he's fun in this.
Yeah, he does good work.
It's actually sad to see him go.
Not much of a warrior at that point in his life, though. He probably would have been out of place on that journey.
Yeah, he wasn't going to go out with the war party. It's interesting to think, if you try to explain what he did in this movie, we have these two Arabic-speaking ambassadors traveling up through what would eventually be modern-day Russia, looking to meet this one set of people. They run into another set of people who are Vikings. They're trying to communicate with them. They're trying different languages. Ahmed tells the Sharif character, try talking to somebody in Greek, and then he finds a guy, except they're not talking Greek. They're speaking Latin, as far as I can tell. But they didn't bother to talk about that. But there's whole scenes where they're literally translating in real time. Like a guy says something, and then he said this.
Hold on. I'm going to ask a stupid question. Mm-hmm. Don't make fun of me. Is it possible that Greek was Latin at this point?
I think they're pretty distinct.
They weren't speaking Latin in Greece still, right?
No, I think the Greek heyday, I am not either, so I'm totally winging it here. But I believe that the heyday of Greece, predates the Roman Empire. So a lot of the Roman stuff is inspired by the Greeks who came some generations before them.
Yeah, I knew that they did. I didn't know about the language, though, and what was going on there. I learned it in Eddie Izzard stand-up.
Okay.
The Romans stole from the Greeks a lot.
Okay. Well, we are plumbing the depths of our cultural knowledge here and exposing ourselves
or lack thereof.
In real time. But I mean, Latin's easy to recognize because we've seen enough of it in popular culture that Greek is pretty different.
Don't hold us to any of this. We're not historians. We're just podcasters trying to make sense of things.
Or do hold us. If you're an ancient civilization expert, chime in, hit us up. We want to know where we fucked up.
We're going to get roasted. One of my favorite lines, and by favorite, I mean dumbest, comes in this section where Ahmed asks, are they dangerous? And Omar Sharif says, it depends. Maybe they'll let us go. Maybe they'll kill us. Well, that sounds like they're dangerous. He didn't ask, are they capable of killing us? The answer is obviously yes. He asked, are they dangerous? Yeah. And he's like, well, they might murder us or maybe not. So we'll see. No, the answer is yes then.
Yeah.
If they're even capable of murdering you, they're dangerous. I don't think you understood the question, sir.
Yeah, he's a funny sort of guy in this, and he wanted to tease his friend with the fear of the Vikings killing them. But it turned out the Vikings were totally chill, unlike the Tartars who were chasing them.
Yeah, that was scary. That was some good tension in that scene, getting chased through the desert. But the Vikings show up and they just want to party.
Yeah, they're celebrating. They're having a wake. And they just kind of accept that these Arabs are hanging out with them. And one guy starts to communicate who becomes really a main character, Herger, because he's the translator, becomes the buddy to Ahmed.
Probably the second lead, really.
Yeah. And he's good. This is an actor that I don't know from anything else, but he's very fun. It really helps make this movie work.
Yeah, he brings some levity to the proceedings, but he still has that kind of warrior spirit that you would expect from a Viking. We get some glimpses of his battle prowess, but most of the time, he's pretty amiable, pretty jovial. He calls Ahmed a little brother, which is an endearing term. And then we get a glimpse, I guess, they're trying to show us that Bolvai is a real badass dude because he's sitting there drinking and then all of a sudden just murders a guy with his sword.
Yeah, that was out of nowhere.
In the middle of this party.
They're having a party. And if you're going to set up a confrontation that's meaningful, you would think you would show it coming.
Show an argument or something.
Yeah, or have them give each other some dirty looks. But they're just hanging out, sitting around this little table. And then the fight breaks out while a woman comes up to serve them some more drink. So the sneaky guy goes, this is my chance to draw my sword and stab Bolvai. But it's like, whoa, this is just out of nowhere. And then I read somewhere that supposedly that's his brother. So this was a guy who was contending for the throne. And this was his move to be like, oh, I'm going to be king. And then Bolvi just dispatches him, cuts his chest straight open.
Nice special effects on the sword slash there. It's pretty gruesome. This movie does not shy away from gore.
Yeah. I was going to say that one surprised me because there are movies where they show swords going through people. That's usually the way. If you have a sword fighting movie and you want to show some gore, you show people getting run through. But other than that, even on movies that are kind of intense, sword attacks are hard to depict on screen. It's either you run him through or you sort of run past him and drag your sword through his midsection and he falls over it, but then you don't see anything.
Right.
But this one, they actually tried to show like he slashes him across the chest and a big gash opens up in the guy's chest. So I'm like, oh, I got to give him credit.
Pretty gnarly stuff, yeah.
That was a choice and they did something striking with it.
It shows one of the strengths of the movie, which is in its fight scenes and its action scenes and how visceral the violence is, and it establishes a feeling of stakes because you see people die, not only die like they would die in an action movie, but they die pretty horribly. Sometimes you see the aftermath, sometimes you see the act itself. But it also highlights one of the weaknesses of the movie, I think, is the interpersonal relationships between the Viking crew. There's just too many of them for us to really get attached to more than two of them, which end up being Bolvi and Herger. We have 13 warriors. We know Ahmed, we know Herger, we know Bolvi. Then you got just 9 red shirts with you. And they try to give them, some of them, little identifying features or characteristics, but it never really worked for me.
It's a lot. And I was wondering, okay, why do you pick that number? Why does Michael Crichton pick that number? Why does anyone pick numbers in movies like Dirty Dozen and Magnificent Seven and Three Musketeers? And it's like, well, you need enough guys that if you send them to some village, they have to be badasses. But with 13 guys, you can make a dent, right? If you're fighting off an army of something evil, that's enough to be a squad that can actually lead a town in fighting a war. If you just got Three Musketeers, well, they can do some damage on the individual level, but they're not going to defeat an army by themselves. They needed a whole squad. And you're right, there's not enough time with them. Except for, I can think of a couple guys that have a scene where they show their personality.
What are their names?
I don't know anyone's name in this movie.
There's face tattoo guy. Yep, we know him. What's his name?
Yeah, there's a guy who hangs out in the tree.
Yep, what's his name?
No idea. But I know.
We watched this movie twice this week. We don't know any of their fucking names.
I watched the movie and I didn't know Herger's name and I didn't know Bolvi's name. Like the movie, except for Ahmed, who introduces himself repeatedly. That's one of his running gags, is that he likes to say his whole name to people. No one else gets a strong introduction like that. They get mentioned by other people, but like the dialogue is constructed in sort of a realistic way where they're talking with accents and they all just go, oh, he's doing the thing. And you're like, oh, I think they're talking about that guy, but I could never tell you what that name they just said.
That's true. Yeah. The movie does not do a great job of holding our hand, which sometimes we complain about movies that dumb down for the viewers. Mm-hmm. This is one where maybe they could have dumbed it down a little more for us.
I didn't mind it as long as it wasn't counting on me knowing or being able to know too much about those guys. It kind of replicates the experience that Ahmed has, which is thrown in with a bunch of strangers who know each other, but they're not bothering to like introduce themselves to you and come up and shake your hand and go, hi, I'm the X guy with the big shield or whatever. There's none of that action to really walk you through.
That's true. And that brings me to a point that I liked, the way you slowly adapt to the Viking crew at the same pace Ahmed does. It's handled very deftly, but it's handled in a way that is atypical for movies in general, I think, which is why it's a little jarring.
Yeah, this movie makes you think you know what it is because a lot of it looks standard. Guys in Viking outfits slashing swords at each other feels like, oh, I know what this is. But a lot of it's not that standard. And that's the fun part of it. The clash of cultures is really pretty unique. And just the way it goes, okay, you're on a ride with Ahmed and we're just going wherever these guys are taking him, which is interesting. It's not that compelling as a story, but it's interesting.
Right. We'll get into how it is or is not compelling a little later, but do you want me to walk through the second part of the story for us now?
Yeah, let's jump into Act 2.
All right. During the journey north, Ahmed learns the Vikings' language by listening to them speak. The men mock his small Arabian horse, but Bolvi is impressed with Ahmed's literacy. Arriving in the northern land of King Hrothgar, the warriors find out their enemy are the Vendel, bear-like men who steal the heads of their victims. Late that night, Ahmed experiences his first battle as the warriors fend off a sneak attack by the Vendel. We're going with Vendel, right?
Yeah, good job.
All right. The next day, the men work to shore up the village defenses, and Ahmed converts his heavy Viking sword into a slender scimitar. One of the king's sons looks to be stirring up trouble, so to put him in his place, Herger challenges the man's fearsomely large friend to a duel and bests him in the battle. So the movie almost turns into like a horror movie in this section. It's kind of like a slasher film.
It's definitely trying to set up this fear which is fun, which is also part of the anthropology part, because you suspect that maybe you're in a horror film or maybe these are people from another era that are willing to believe stuff. So you go, okay, what's going on here? But it wants you to think for a while that these villains, that's ancient evil that must not be named.
It's like Voldemort, yeah. Tom Riddle.
Might actually be supernatural.
I think the movie can work as a horror movie, even if it's not supernatural, because that is a trope. These people that don't speak your language, you might see them as savage. They're described as being cannibalistic in this movie. So that's a tried and true villain for horror movies in and of itself. So whether it's going the supernatural route or not, I think the movie kind of becomes a horror movie in the second act regardless.
That's true. And they're certainly acting scary. They sneak up on you while you're sleeping in the middle of the night, break down your door and start stealing heads. So
cool scene. I like that scene. The night ambush where they're all kind of sleeping in a circle facing the door. Very interesting. I didn't do the research to see if that was a real thing that Viking warriors did to protect themselves at night, but it feels like it would be.
I feel like that's a scene from Beowulf.
Oh, it is. You're right. Yeah. In the Great Hall, right? With Grendel.
Yeah. Everyone goes to sleep in the Great Hall and then the Grendel comes, or in this case, the Vendel.
It's been a while since I've read. I don't read Beowulf for fun.
No, I never read it, but I remember that from the movie CGI version.
Got it. We'll have to cover that one day too. That was Zemeckis, right? The fucking maniac.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah. Again, his weird CGI phase, which I guess is still going if you watch Welcome to Marwen.
Oh, yeah.
Got to cover that too.
We're going to have to.
The list is getting long.
So speaking of supernatural, there are things in this movie that felt supernatural to me that were not intended to be that way. Ahmed is traveling with these Vikings and he's listening to them and he's squinting, and we have this cool sequence where he's just watching them talk to each other around the campfire and he's focusing on their lips and he's concentrating really hard, and all of a sudden he can understand them. It morphs into that, which was really cool. What you, I think, were alluding to is it's portrayed on screen in a really cool way, the way it all of a sudden he becomes able to make their speech intelligible. But I was like, oh, our guy has a magic power. He can absorb languages overnight.
Right. It could seem that way. That's not what they were trying to do. It's a hard thing to convey visually, gradually learning a new language. Usually you'll do it with somebody like listening to a recording and they say a word and then like a montage and they say more words over time, but you can't really do that here. So I think this was a creative way to get that point across. But if you weren't really paying attention, or not to say you weren't paying attention, but there's multiple ways to interpret that scene until you realize what's really going on.
I think pointing out that a montage is the usual method for that is a good point, because this, I think it thinks it's a montage, but it's subtle enough. Like they didn't actually change the location. If they had shown these scenes in visibly different places with a little cut of them walking across a mountain ridge and then another campfire and then he's studying them again and then they're wading through a stream and then another campfire, like you would understand the passage of time, but they kind of like, well, we don't have time for that. We're just going to show them staring at these guys' lips for a minute. And
yeah, this movie's a lean, mean hour and 40 minutes or so, and they were not about to add any more minutes to it. But that also fills in some gripes I had. Ahmed seems to get really good with a sword quickly, but like you said, they do seem to be indicating a lot of time is passing in between these little vignettes that make up the main set pieces of the movie.
That could be true. I thought that was just like a kind of a corny character choice, but maybe you're right. Maybe he learned, because he's like, I'm a poet, I'm not a warrior. And then he finally gets a sword that he likes. And he's like, check out my fucking badass sword moves. I'm like, where did you get those?
He starts twirling it around. He's doing all types of shit. Yeah.
But they didn't teach him because he's doing stuff they don't do. They do the big swings with their giant broadswords. So like, he must have had those skills. I guess, he was a Renaissance man, I suppose. He knew
enough. He knew enough to describe the blade he wanted to a blacksmith and get it made. So he must know something about swords.
He actually takes over in that scene. He's like trying to picture, and then he goes, hold on, give me the blade. And he starts leaning against the grinding wheel. So he's got quite a lot of skills.
The scene that I both liked and was a little disturbed by was the post-Vendel attack in the house. They find a young boy covered in blood, crying. That always gets me now, being a dad. I hate those scenes. As a father to children, like politicians always say. But that was affecting, just seeing like a boy crying covered in blood, and then they get up to this house, and it is just chaos. Body parts everywhere, tarps covering it. And then we find out that the Vendel think that they're bears.
Right.
And that's why they act like this. But bears don't act like that. I don't think they understand much about bear culture. Is culture the right word? Behavior? Because bears, they're not pack animals. These guys clearly travel in large packs. Bears are more solitary. They don't do ambushes. They're not ambush predators.
That's true.
Like a cheetah might be, where they lay in wait and then get you. They tend to like come upon stuff by accident. They're kind of scavengers. They go through your garbage. So like that would have been cute if they had a scene of a guy like going through the Vikings garbage cans. Or like, also, I didn't see one Vendel with a honey pot on his head or stealing any picnic baskets outfits, like
That's
it's
true.
like they know nothing about bears. What's going on here?
Hey, boo-boo, we got to get ourselves some of these Viking heads.
All jokes aside, though, like none of their behavior is bear appropriate.
It's pretty thin. And then half of them have horns, too, so they look like buffaloes to me.
I've never heard of buffaloes doing any of this terrible stuff. You're like,
No, they might trample you if you get in their way, but
yeah.
they don't stalk you.
So I don't know. The whole bear thing felt a little thin to me, but whatever. It's a premise for a fantasy movie.
And it's cool and scary. And they went all out on the makeup and the costuming. So there's a lot of them. There's certainly is a lot of dudes in bear outfits.
Even more so when they get to their lair finally, which is why it must have been so expensive to shoot. But the attacks they're all well done. I have no bones to pick except with the lack of appropriate bear behavior. The bare necessities, you could say. Everything outside of that, I have no problem with those attack scenes. They're well done. They're tense. They're scary. And because you've seen how they treat their victims, you're like, oh, this is serious. If they get caught, they're not just going to get stabbed. Some real gruesome shit is going to go down.
This isn't your usual conflict where someone wants to come in and take your stuff. I guess they kind of want to take your stuff to eat, but what they want to take to eat is your head. So you cannot compromise with enemies like this. They're
just so mindlessly evil. You don't have any real inkling of their motivations. It's hard to make a compelling movie when you have such little insight into the villains,
We had this problem with Cowboys and Aliens, like mindless sort of animalistic bad guys.
They love gold.
Yeah, besides loving gold or loving to eat people's heads, we don't know a lot. They don't speak. They do seem a little bit crafty, but then at other times they're just
primitive.
Primitive.
Yeah, cunning is a good word to describe them, I think. Like they set traps and stuff, but they're not smart in the sense of, they could have a debate, which I guess shouldn't be like the measure of all intelligence. I couldn't think of another example.
I challenge you to a debate.
Somebody does get challenged to a duel, though.
That's right. Yeah.
This poor bastard, just for being somebody's friend, he gets his head cut off.
In a weird side story, yeah.
I felt like this scene turned me against the Vikings that we're supposed to be rooting for a little bit, because first of all, the reason for the duel is very glossed over. You could blink and miss it.
I missed it on the first watch, and only after reading about it and then watching it again, I'm like, oh, I get it. That's where they set up who that guy was and what the problem was.
It's basically that King Hrothgar's son is just being uppity.
Yeah, he doesn't like Bolvi being around, and there's one scene where he challenges him in a little verbal sparring, and then seems like he's planning some nasty rumors to try to get Bolvi on the bad side of the king. And they're like, okay, we got to deal with this. And here's how we do it in Viking land. You get your little buddy, Herger, to challenge their biggest buddy and kick his ass.
Herger, we should state for people who haven't watched the movie, a short king, like myself, maybe rocking 5'9", 5'10", but not a tall dude.
But yeah, appearances can be deceiving. He is much more of a formidable opponent than you would realize.
Although he gets his ass kicked for the first few minutes of the fight.
Yeah, but it was all
plays possum a little bit.
Yeah, it was all a big trick, and then he just whips around and cuts the guy's head off. So it's pretty brutal and like a great way if you're going to build out this character and show that he's not just a jokester and a clever guy who speaks multiple languages, but he's actually such a superior fighter to anybody in this other little kingdom. It's great, but it starts and ends there. I don't know. It's like a whole little subplot that just spins up and back down.
It's like the definition of a side quest. It has no impact on the rest of the movie. I feel like, first of all, the fact that he survived an attack by the Vendel already tells you he's a formidable fighter. You probably could have gotten that point across a little more economically in another scene, but they set this up. It takes like 10 minutes for the whole thing to see the king's son being a little shit stirrer. Then Herger throws mud at the tall gentleman that he ends up murdering to start the whole thing.
Right,
it's a long, he's got to start the fight, and then they don't just start fighting right there. They got to go get their weapons and stuff, and then they go to the town square to fight. It's a whole process. It really slowed the movie down for me.
And I'm trying to think, what's the point of this? It's interesting to go, okay, your heroes are facing this challenge from without. It's a big, faceless, mindless enemy, but to make things worse, they also have a challenge from within their group. Someone is disloyal or trying to bring them down. It's a good way to complicate a drama, but it gets to one of the big problems with the movie is none of that is Ahmed's drama. That's Bolvi's drama.
None of any is his drama.
Yeah, very little is, except can I learn to fight? Can I get a sword that works? Can I survive these battles?
But even to be in the situation he's in, he's a passive observer. He's not part of this culture. This battle really isn't his. Some old lady in a hut pointed at him and was like, you got to go. And he was like, I guess I got to go. Yeah. I'm an ambassador. It's my job. But like he does feel removed from all of it.
Yeah, except when he exercises his superpowers. Now he has another superpower.
Is it with the ladies?
The Eagle Eye Zoom. Oh yeah, he's good with the ladies. That was his.
It's Antonio Banderas though, so that should go without saying.
Yeah, that goes without saying. But first we learned that he can absorb languages like a sponge. And then we learned he has the Eagle Eye Zoom. You look through his eye and you can see a mile across a valley and spot tiny naked boys running through the meadow.
You got to put that in different way. You're making that sound a little bit creepy.
It's not creepy, but it is weird. So the movie physically looks weird at this point, and it's not the only time they do it. They filmed this, they went up to British Columbia and they built their sets on this incredible piece of natural beauty. And they got a lot of room to work in. So they make the most of it in the film, right? Like they show vistas where you can actually, you can look way across the mountains and see shit. And you're like, okay, we're really there. And then they like, let's zoom in. Let's have a scene where a child comes running out. And this is the child that you're talking about that came out of that house where they all got butchered. But like they didn't have him run up the street of the village. They have him running fucking Sound of Music style on the next mountain over. And the camera zooms in so far that the film gets grainy. You see the film grain exaggerated because they had to try to make him visible on screen. It's a weird choice. It's cool because I love that it has the feeling like if you've ever done backpacking in the mountains and you know that experience of being able to look all around you and see things at great
Have you done
distances.
backpacking in the mountains?
Yeah, once or twice.
What's the longest you've gone backpacking?
Just a handful of days, 5 days or something. I'm not
trying to get more Ian tidbits. Fill in the backstory.
That was just a high school kind of thing. I was never an outdoorsman, but I went with my buddies up into the Sierras. And yeah, there's some of that where it's like really cool. There's another scene where we think that the Vendel are still watching us from the tree line. Look over there. And the camera zooms way the hell across to this next ridge. And you see some like deer being flushed out of the tree line. And they go, oh, look over there. And the camera whips around to the other side. And you're like, you can see for miles in both directions. And it's cool to really be in this place. But it turns out it wasn't a superpower. Just everybody back then had pretty good eyesight, I guess.
Yeah, a lot of carrots in their diet. That was a thing. That part of the world, they ate a lot of carrots.
They were just scrounging for carrots.
They were on the Bugs Bunny diet.
But I wanted to make a note here. When we talked about the Dark Tower not that long ago, one of our big complaints was this huge climactic battle that they showed was staged in a little gully, like in a municipal park. Instead, that was like supposed to have this effect. And this was the polar opposite of that, right? Like,
yeah, they filmed that fucking scene in the Dark Tower in like the outfield of Dodger Stadium.
Yeah, put some barricades and pump in some smoke and put a bush right here so no one can see the right field wall. And yeah, this is the opposite of that. You can fucking turn all the way around and look in every direction and there's just mountains and forests. It's pretty neat. It's one of the good things.
It's one of my favorite things about the movie is the cinematography and the vistas. The movie looks incredible. That's rare nowadays. I hate to sound like such a boomer when I say shit like this, but a lot of this movie would have been CGI'd if they made it today.
It feels different. I hate to be that guy too, but this is a movie that reminds you like, oh, there is something different about a real mountain valley and a camera just looking across it versus a CGI version.
British Columbia doesn't feel like a terrain that we've seen on film a lot either, so it feels fresh. Like as beautiful as Hawaii is, at the end of Waterworld, when they go to the big island or whatever, you're like, oh, they filmed Jurassic Park there. They filmed Lost there. Like I've seen this island and this specific beach so many times, but I don't know, all of the locations they film in here feel unique to the movie, which is fun because that kind of puts us in Ahmed's shoes as well. He's in a strange place and we almost feel that.
Totally. It's definitely one of the best parts of the movie.
All right. You ready to walk us through the ending?
Yeah, here we go. So that night, the Vendel attack in greater numbers, but Ahmed realizes that their dreaded fire serpent is just a line of men on horseback with torches, and that they aren't actually supernatural creatures, they're just guys who like to dress up like bears. The Vikings lose some men but drive off their attackers. Next day, with advice from another old woman oracle, the remaining warriors track the Vendel to the caves where they live. They infiltrate the caverns and fight their way down to the deepest chamber. Bolvi kills the Vendel's spiritual leader, the mother of the Vendel, but not before she scratches him with a poison claw. Then the men return to the village and wait for the Vendel army to come and kill them. Bolvi is weak from the poison. I was going to say Bolvi is weak from the poison.
Bounce, suck your blood.
But he rallies his men with a Viking poem and then proceeds to kill the Vendel's chieftain. And with their 2 leaders dead, the Vendel retreat and the kingdom is saved. But Bolvi has died from the poison. In the end, we see Ahmed writing out the story of his adventure just as Bolvi had hoped he would.
I did like how they had a boss fight, but it was like the sub-boss fight. It's like, oh, you got to fight, first of all, mother of the Vendel, Vendel's mother, Grendel's mother. I was like, all right.
Yeah.
A little heavy-handed. But they're like, she's the boss fight. And then, no, there's another fight. It's like when RPG, like Final Fantasy games where they change forms at the end. Yeah. It was like a fake out boss fight.
It was. And she was so thin, like they kind of set her up. There's this thing where the Earth Mother idol gets dropped in the little house that was ransacked. And then you see a bigger version of it. You get into the cave and you're like, this is going to be a scary boss. It's going to be like a huge woman who might be nearly supernatural or something that you believe is something really strange that you've never seen. And it's just a skinny little lady.
Yeah, it's just a lady.
She's got some mud on her. her. She's a little bit earthy because she's smeared with dirt. It feels very video gamey there too. Like she's in there and there's one guy and you have to kill that guy and then you have to cut her head off. But it's like there was no big payoff for the sort of supernatural, oh my gosh, this is the heart of this culture. She's just a creepy lady.
Yeah. Well, as we see, the Vikings are also guided by creepy ladies and their visions. So
true.
Maybe it's like a fun one-to-one comparison between the cultures. Like, we're not so different, you and I, type of thing. But without saying that, because she doesn't speak their language.
Right.
Or any language as far as we could tell. But she does scratch him with a little poison claw.
That was spooky. She's holding it when he comes in and she like dips it in a little bowl of black stuff. And you're like, uh-oh, don't get scratched by that. And of course he does.
So the cave is fucking huge. They could probably reuse a lot of little tunnels and stuff, just rearrange some of the bones and move some torches around to make it look slightly different. But it seems like they're filming it in a cave that's covered in bones. And that's probably what they did, right?
Yeah, there's actually some nice shots where you're like looking from one cave ledge across and there's a bunch of people on the other side. It felt very Indiana Jones in there. They do some swinging and some going through waterfalls. And there's a lot of juicy cave action if you're into that kind of thing in your adventure movies.
Did she give birth to all the Vendel?
Well, it's a good question.
She's the only lady we see.
It's not a very realistic depiction of a culture. That's why I thought she should be the boss lady and not like the only lady. That was weird. There's got to be some women. There's got to be some people actually doing the work of maintaining. Like they can't just raid. That was my problem with the smokers in Waterworld. Like they're just raiders. Is there nobody who does the cooking and making stuff? But maybe not.
They do not sew. They're like the Ironborn from Game of Thrones. They just take what they want. They don't make anything.
Well, there you go.
I guess there is precedent.
There's a couple of South Park-y moments in this movie that I felt like this might be where they got the trope from. So they're tracking down the Vendel. This is when they're figuring out that they've got to go look in the caves. And Ahmed steps up to do some hero stuff because he doesn't have that much to contribute most of the time. But they're like, we're chasing them down, but we don't know where to look for them, these bear people. And he's like, wait, did you say bears? Yeah, bear. They're bear people. And what do bears do? They shit in the woods. We'll go catch them shitting. But it's not what he actually says. But he's like, bears, where do bears live? Bears live in caves. We must look in the cave. So there's like some of those talking through the logic in the crudest ways. And then he does it again. They get in the cave, they kill the lady, and they're trying to make an exit, and they get stuck. And they go, oh, I hear rain outside. And he goes, wait, did you say rain? He literally says, wait, did you say rain? Rain means thunder. Thunder means the thunder cliffs. Thunder cliffs is by the ocean. This water leads to the ocean. I was like, oh boy, Trey Parker definitely saw this movie.
I've got to assume that Crichton wrote those parts because a lot of his dialogue, if you read his books too, is like these contrivances that lead to deeper understandings. But you're right. That is like a thing South Park has gone back to. Not to mention, I guess it would be the other way around. The Vendel, were they inspired by Man Bear Pig? Was Man Bear Pig already around?
Oh, this is a good question.
No, Man Bear Pig debuted in 2006. So yeah, I think you've uncovered a theory that maybe Trey Parker and Matt Stone are big fans of the 13th Warrior.
This is a key to a lot of their future work.
There's a lot in here to spot if you're a South Park fan. I'm like a lapsed South Park fan. I haven't watched any of the new stuff in a long time. But I remember
same
that
here.
era well.
So these are the Man Bear dudes.
Half man, half bear, half pig. They're Man Bear Pig. That whole episode hasn't aged well, though, because they were making fun of Al Gore for believing in climate change.
Yeah, just like you said, being a lapsed fan of South Park is probably the place to be. You don't want to go back into it. Probably find some stuff you don't necessarily agree with.
Yeah, Craig. We gotta leave that in for my friend Craig. He's always bugging me to watch South Park. I don't do it. So yeah, now the fight between Bolvi and the big bad of the Vendel feels a little anticlimactic. We're ready for that cathartic come down from the big battle, them leaving the cave. I'm ready for Bolvi to die peacefully in his sleep because once he gets scratched with that claw, you know he's a goner, and he knew it too.
Yeah.
But then they show up again, and I'm like, all right, you know.
They show up again and say, okay, we got to do another battle. Because there's been a lot of gearing up for a big assault. I guess there's a kind of movie that's all about defending from waves of enemies. This movie's turning into that. But just underscore the fact that this is maybe not the original way the movie should have ended. There's a big assault, but it ends really quick. Like all that happens in this fight is the big bad runs up to the big good, and Bolvi cuts him down pretty effortlessly, despite the fact that he's nearly dead from poison.
While clearly dying. He looks like his clothes must weigh 10 pounds extra because they're just drenched in sweat. He's got the fever.
Yeah.
He shakes. He's pale. He's on death's door. But, you know, he's a warrior. One of 13.
Yeah, it's the old summon up the strength for that one last big swing of the sword and cut the guy down. And the guy gives out a horrible shriek when he dies, which I guess is enough to tell the Vendel that it's all over.
They run away. They run away in such a goofy way. Yeah, I don't know why. I found it so funny watching them run away after he dies. Because, I don't know, they look like LARPers to me at that point. I don't know if they couldn't get the original Vendel guys back for the reshoots or something, but I don't know. They looked very silly and not threatening.
Yeah, there was actually one moment in that retreat that really worked for me where they're taking on off, and there's a lot of riderless horses leaving with them, which felt like a sort of semi-real moment of a battle. The riders are fleeing and the horses are following them, and a lot of them are not bringing their original riders home, which shows the way the battle worked out for them. But then they go and they stand, they all line up on a ridge, again, half a mile away, and thankfully everyone has eagle vision, because we look at them across the valley, and they're all standing there, and then they melt into the ground. Do you know what I mean? Like,
I think it was just supposed to be another nod to how good they are at blending into their surroundings. You know, because they have this tendency to fade into the mist throughout their battles. They were almost, I would say, supernaturally good at just disappearing from these ambushes they would launch.
That's true.
So I think this is a nod to that they're so in tune with their surroundings, they can appear to disappear.
They're just, sinking into the mist. But it looked to me like they were kneeling down and lying on the ground. Like, you're lying on a ridge there. You're going to have to get up and walk home from there still.
It'd just be nice if they all just waved. That was the end of the movie.
We are going back to our home planet.
Exactly. And then Ahmed says goodbye and gets in his boat with a couple of Vikings, right? He's got a few Vikings in there with him.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out what's going on because he leaves his buddy on the shore. I had to look up his name again, Herger. They're the real buddies. This is a buddy picture between those two guys. And they sign off.
But Herger's got to lead the clan now, right? He's in charge now. So
is he in charge of Hrothgar's kingdom? Is that what he got left there?
I don't fucking know. I just assumed, like, why else would he stay?
Yeah, but he's staying in the Hrothgar land, which is quite far away from where they first met him. And he's like, goodbye, Arab. And Ahmed says, goodbye, Northman. And I'm like, I feel you guys, because I never learned any of your names either. Like, at the end of this whole thing, they were still calling each other by stereotypes.
And then Ahmed is just a strange sign off. What does he say to Herger? Thanks for helping me be a good servant of God.
So I made a note about that. Or does he say that to himself as he was writing the book? And these are the people that helped me. In any case.
Oh, yeah, you might be right. Maybe he's just speaking of the Vikings in general, not Herger's.
Yeah, he was saying like how this adventure and the real lesson was I became a good servant of God. And like, oh, well, this guy is a very faithful man, which we understood because there are a couple references to it, but it's...
There's some lines that indicate he's pretty devout, but they don't come up often and they're not dwelled upon. You know, It doesn't feel like a defining characteristic of his character.
I guess he refuses the alcohol, which is one expression of his faith.
Except the mead, because it's made of honey, my man. Herger says that like fucking Matthew McConaughey and Dazed and Confused. It's made of honey, my dude. Don't worry, baby.
Toke up on this mead, bro.
I do like mead, though. It's pretty delicious.
Is it good? I never had it.
Really? Oh, I love mead. There's a really good meadery in Cleveland, actually, now to circle back around.
Wow.
To our Ohio conversation.
Full circle. But yeah, this ending with the sort of very cute finishing the last line of his book about the journey, which is a nod to the real history, as we talked about. This guy was real. He didn't fight off the Vendel in his real journey, but he did go on an adventure. He wrote some of the stuff that is actual meaningful text to historians, but it kind of feels cute and small. He's like, and that's what I did on my semester abroad. Closes the book.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you raised, because I walked away from this movie feeling like it felt like the season finale of a TV show more than a movie, because it's like he falls in with this rowdy gang of travelers and then they have this adventure. But when it's done, like they could make a sequel to this and the Vikings wouldn't factor into it at all. It would be like another season of a TV show, which is more of how movies used to be. Not everything had to be a direct continuation. You could have a sequel to a movie that had featured all new characters except for one or two, like Indiana Jones.
He's like, oh no, where are they sending Ahmed now? He's going down the Silk Road. What is he going to have to deal with?
But the whole thing felt like a supersized episode of Mandalorian, in the sense that if you watch The Mandalorian, almost every episode is Mando, Jarden Jin, just walking into a town and he's like, I need this thing that you guys have. And they're like, well, if you want that thing, you got to go kill this thing because it's blocking us from doing what we need to do. And he's like, all right. And he goes, kills the thing. He's like, all right, bye. Thanks for this thing I needed. Yeah. He has no personal stake in whatever he's doing. He's just doing it because it's his job and he needs to do it to move on to his next thing. And that's kind of the vibe I got from this movie. He doesn't assimilate into the Viking culture at the end. He doesn't start living among them forever. He's probably going back home or going to his next posting, and that's that.
He puts his headgear back on in a very jovial way at the end, like, finally, I get to dress like myself again. Yeah, it feels episodic in that way. And it makes you wish they lean more into it. I think that goes back to a major Crichton choice, that he was doing two things. He was trying to retell Beowulf and make it interesting, to spite his friend who gave the lecture that said Beowulf was a boring ass story. And he was trying to incorporate this actual historical figure and this stuff about the Vikings meeting an Arab man.
I guess there is some debate about how historical this historical figure was. There's been some indications that a lot of it was fabricated, but that's neither here nor there. I think they believed it to be historical, so they approached it from that point of view.
Yeah, it's just, you got two things going on again at the same time. And like we said, that led to some confusion. confusion. Whose story is this? It's kind of Bulvai's story for the middle of it, and your ostensible hero is just an observer. He's hanging on. He has to overcome some challenges to hang with the boys, but he's just kind of watching, and it has kind of an unsatisfying feeling. It's not bad as a hang. The whole movie is kind of a hang, and if you're willing to just hang with it and catch its vibe, it's pleasant.
Yeah, you know what? I guardedly recommend this movie because, for one thing, the production design is fantastic, like we mentioned.
Yeah.
The action scenes are well done. I mean, Banderas is great. Who doesn't love watching Antonio Banderas just do stuff and say things? And
He's a charmer.
walk around. Great actor. Yeah, why not? There's worse ways to spend an hour and 40 minutes. There are people out there that love this movie, really do. I wouldn't go that far, but I'd say I like it. And I'd say I wouldn't be opposed to watching it again in a few years if somebody had never seen it and was like, oh, let's throw this on. I wouldn't say, no, this movie sucks. I'd throw out some reservations, just know what you're in for, but it could be a good time.
If you like any of the texture or the locations and the kind of people that it throws you in with, there's a lot to get out of it.
Do you want to hear the story of the movie's release and what happened at the box office? We alluded to it, but
Yeah, how did it lose so much dang money?
so it opened in second place with 10.2 million, we mentioned. I didn't mention what was in first place, and that probably sealed the fate of this movie. It was a big surprise hit called The Sixth Sense. The Sixth Sense was already in its fourth week.
Oh, I didn't see that coming.
Still making $20 million. You didn't see that coming.
You threw a twist.
So other new releases were In Too Deep, The Astronaut's Wife, The Muse, and Dudley Do-Right. There's a few future episodes in there. The Astronaut's Wife for sure. It had a respectable drop, only dropped 17% into its second week, which is pretty good. Most movies we talk about on here dropped 40%, 50% week to week. But The Sixth Sense was only picking up steam. It made even more. The next week, it made $29 million in its fifth week.
Yeah, that was a special movie that became a juggernaut at the box office over time.
R-rated, semi-horror, semi-drama, thriller. They kind of occupy a similar space.
Yeah.
I could see some audience overlap happening there. I'm sure the studio did not foresee The Sixth Sense being the juggernaut it ended up being. So when they scheduled this movie, they probably didn't foresee that. Then in the third week, it would drop to sixth place, all the way to sixth with $3 million. It was starting to lose its momentum at that point, and then it just faded away.
Like I said, I didn't see it go. It's not past me.
Yeah, I don't think this movie would have made money if Sixth Sense came out and bombed and nobody saw it, but I think this movie would have done better.
It was in such a deep hole to start with. It probably never had a chance, but could have made a little more of it back.
And I think The Sixth Sense attracted a lot of repeat viewers too, because they wanted to go back in and watch the movie from the beginning to see if they could spot any hints at the twist. So if somebody went to the theater twice in a month and saw The Sixth Sense twice, they're probably not going to see The 13th Warrior also.
No.
Banderas did stay busy after this. He's definitely been in some bombs, though. Even after this, he was in Femme Fatale, Brian De Palma, Rebecca Romijn movie we'll have to cover someday, and Ballistic X versus Sever, which is one of the bombs. People talk about bombs. That's always brought up as one of the worst of all time. Stay tuned for that one. But he's still working, man. He was a character in The Hitman's Wife's Bodyguard, which I didn't see, named Aristotle Papadopoulos. That's a great fucking name.
Yeah.
I love that. I want to watch that movie now just to see him do it. And he's going to be the bad guy in the Uncharted movie.
Oh, cool.
I bet we'll cover that one day. That movie's going to suck.
Oh, I'm not a Sony guy, so I don't know anything about Uncharted.
Man, everyone says this. It's such like an internet take, but Nathan Fillion 10 years ago was Nathan Drake. First of all, my name is Jonathan Drake. I'm only 2 letters off Nathan Drake.
That's right.
Nobody called me to ask me to star, which is fine. Tom Holland's too young, I think. And Mark Wahlberg is too young as Sully. And also, I'm sick of Mark Wahlberg.
I think a lot of people are.
I'm not sick of Tom Holland yet.
No.
But I want to see him do some, well, he did Cherry. I wouldn't call that a small movie, but it was more character work. But I'd like to see him do some non-superhero video game IP stuff, you know?
Yeah.
He's a good actor. I don't want him to get burnt out like what's happening to Chris Pratt now.
Well, he's making his money. Now's his time.
I did want to shout out Vladimir Kulich, who plays Bulvai in this movie.
Right.
Video game fans and listeners of the Blast Zone will recognize him. He's the voice of Ulfric Stormcloak in Skyrim.
That's wild.
Isn't that awesome?
That's cool.
Love that guy.
He says so little in this that I don't actually remember what his voice was like, but he's a great presence on screen.
He's got a look. He's got piercing eyes. You know, he can get a lot across with just his facial expressions.
Yeah, it's kind of remarkable because this is going to be the heir apparent to a kingdom, and he's a badass. And it's like, how do you know? Well, just fucking look at him. And he looks at you and you go, oh yeah, no, that's him. That's the guy. It's quite good. And then he has a couple lines. He's a man of few words, but he proves himself to be smarter and a bit of an intellectual. And he's interested in Ahmed for his literacy, and he wants to learn to read, and he wants to be written about. So proves to be a really interesting character, which is good because it's almost the hero of the film, but from an angle. Anyway, he pulled it off. He's one of the bright spots in this movie.
Yeah, I liked him a lot. He's popped up in some Hollywood stuff. I know he was in Smokin' Aces, The Equalizer. I feel like he usually plays just a nameless, heavy bad guy because, we like casting Scandinavian actors as like Russian organized crime figures in America. So I did want to update listeners on McTiernan a little bit because I guess there's been some movement. I think COVID might have killed this, which is too bad. But he was in talks or rumored to be directing a sci-fi film named, and apologies if I am mispronouncing this, Tau Ceti 4 with Uma Thurman. But every article I find on it's from like late 2019, which is pretty recent, all things considered. But something kind of major has happened between now and then that has affected the film industry in a big way. So I don't know if that's going to happen. But I know his financial situation was thrown in upheaval based on his getting arrested and sent to federal prison for a year. He hasn't worked since then. So I think some Hollywood people are trying to rally around him, get him some work.
I mean, he's paid his debt to society, and his crimes were not of a kind where you're like, oh, that man needs to be shunned from Hollywood.
From what we've learned about some other Hollywood people since he was sent to jail, he seems like an overall pretty good guy compared to a lot of the people in that industry.
This was like corporate espionage stuff, right? Not like abusing.
Yeah, it was just between him and a producer and Rollerball he thought was trying to sabotage the movie. Which, all things considered, I think John McTiernan sabotaged the movie by making it. But still, yeah, he didn't murder anyone. It's not an unforgivable crime he did. He lied to the FBI, which if the FBI sat me down and asked me questions, I probably lied to them too. So fingers crossed they never have a reason to.
Yeah, let's hope you don't get caught up in their net. They're a little humble podcast.
I can't imagine how we would. Maybe they'll listen to this episode, though. Hear us talking shit about them. Anyway, that was the 13th Warrior. Did you have any closing thoughts, or did we go over everything already?
I have a fun little closing thought to throw out there. It doesn't sum up the whole thing, but I wanted to offer a different way to interpret the movie.
Tank Girl is a god. No.
Along those lines, I'm like, I got to throw a little wrinkle here. Think about this. It was all a dream.
Hey.
Okay, so when it starts, he's in court. He's in this nice place. He falls asleep after a big meal, and he wakes up at the end of it, and he's back in court, and he's writing down this crazy story that was in his head. And that would explain a lot of unreal stuff that happens during the movie, like learning a language just by squinting and concentrating real hard, and being able to zoom in and look closely at something that's like a mile away from you. That's the kind of thing you could do in a dream. Like, what's that? Oh, and then explains the fight scenes logic. They start out with a lot, but they end really abruptly, like, oh, we're just moving on to the next part of the dream. And then my favorite part of the dream version of this movie, that whole subplot about Herger dispatching the tough guy. It's like a classic dumb dream story that you're trying to tell your friend. Yeah, so there was this big guy and my best friend had to fight him. And oh, your real life best friend? No, my best friend in the dream. This was like my guy, and he had to fight the big guy. But instead of fighting, they fought by picking up different shields and then smashing the shields. And there was like this, okay, yeah, this whole thing was just his crazy dream. Anyway, I get a little extra joy when I view the film through that lens.
What about this? Now, I didn't plan this, but you got the wheels turning up here. He is killed for flirting with a married woman. And this is the afterlife. And he has to work his way out of purgatory into heaven. And that's when he gets on the boat at the end. He's going up the river to heaven.
He's going to Valhalla, to Viking heaven. Yeah, that's cool. I want to see that version.
I don't know why he would be in Viking purgatory and have to fight for them. But, it's a movie or a dream or the afterlife. It could be whatever we want it to be.
You could make that work if the guy who came to court was a Viking and slayed him for some offense.
There you go. Yes, now we're cooking.
Oh, man, we should write the script. I hope no one listens to this and steals our good script idea, because in 6 months, we're going to be pitching this on the blacklist.
We can have Antonio Banderas play the king in court. A little nod to the movie.
Little Easter egg. That's the guy.
Yeah. Thanks so much for listening, guys. That was the 13th Warrior. Next week,
or shortly thereafter,
we'll be back just in time for the Robert Pattinson Batman, or The Batman, sorry. We'll be doing Batman and Robin, the superhero movie that was bad enough. It almost killed superhero movies forever, and certainly Batman movies for a while. So that'll be fun. I have not seen this movie since I was a little kid. So really looking forward to that. That's sarcasm in my voice, if you couldn't tell. And please remember to rate, review, subscribe to the pod wherever you're listening. If it lets you do that, Apple lets you do that. Spotify lets you rate stuff now.
Try it out.
Throw us a little rating. If you want to hit us up on Twitter, we're at BlastZonePod. If you want to shoot us an email, we're blastzonepod@gmail.com. That's for any suggestions for future movies to cover, feedback. If you want to let us know how wrong we got some of the historical elements of this episode.
Yeah, set us straight.
Yeah, we'll cry. Feel free to congratulate me if the Bengals win, or offer me commiserations if they lose. And yeah, good times.
Bad times.
We'll see you next time on the Blast Zone.
See you next time in the Blast Zone.
Your voice got a little wavery there. The Blast Zone.